Welcome to the debate. Right now, in some of the most prestigious academic institutions in the world, nearly half of all doctoral students are just completely abandoning their degrees.
Yeah, half, which is just a massive number.
It is. And, it's not because the coursework is too hard or because they lack the intellectual rigor. It's actually because of this hidden, deeply pervasive crisis of workplace bullying.
Right, and we're looking at some pretty comprehensive research today, specifically Jonathan H. Westover's analysis of systemic abuse in higher education. And the numbers he pulls are, frankly, staggering.
They really are. Anywhere from 28% to 50% of academic workers experience severe workplace bullying during their careers.
And we aren't just talking about, hurt feelings or a demanding boss here. We're talking about massive losses in research productivity, the derailing of brilliant minds, and
devastating health consequences.
exactly, physical and mental. It is a profound crisis of human capital.
It really is. So our discussion today basically centers on the most effective point of intervention. Like, how do we actually solve this crisis? I take the position that academic bullying is, it's a structural inevitability.
A structural inevitability. Okay.
Right. It's caused by the foundational architecture of academia, which was quite literally designed to concentrate an immense amount of power into the hands of just a few individuals.
So you're saying it's baked in?
Entirely baked in. From my perspective, you cannot train or culture shift your way out of a system that grants unchecked authority. The only way out is top-down structural engineering. We have to fundamentally redistribute authority, dismantle traditional one-on-one advisement, and rethink absolute tenure protections.
I see that, but I approach this from the cultural perspective. I'd argue that the crisis is fundamentally driven by the insidious cultural narratives of academia.
Like what, specifically?
Well, we're talking about the prestige hierarchies, right? And this deep-seated normalization of suffering. You can redraw bureaucratic org charts all day long. You can add all the oversight committees you want, but those structural changes will completely fail.
You think they'd fail completely?
I do. In fact, they'll actually be co-opted by abusers if we don't achieve deep behavioral transformation and establish genuine psychological safety at the departmental level.
Well, let's break this down. If you're listening to this and you work in the corporate world, you're probably thinking, if someone is being abused at work, why don't they just go to HR?
Right, or just transfer to a new manager.
Exactly. But what we have to understand about academia is that those standard escape hatches, they just do not exist. To see why, we have to look at how power actually functions in these environments.
Okay.
The traditional academic advisor operates exactly like an unregulated monopoly.
Unregulated monopoly, that's a strong comparison. How do you mean?
Think about a 26-year-old international graduate student in a wet lab. Their entire future, their funding, their access to highly specialized million-dollar lab equipment.
Their publication record, yeah.
Right, and crucially, their visa status. It all relies entirely on a single human being, their principal investigator or their advisor. When one entity controls the sole currency of a market, abuse isn't an anomaly, right? It's a feature.
They can extract infinite unpaid labor.
Yes. They can withhold authorship credit to keep the student working in the lab for an extra 2 years. They can threaten to pull visa sponsorship.
So if we acknowledge that this monopoly exists structurally, how can we possibly expect mere cultural shifts or polite conversations to regulate it?
I understand the appeal of the monopoly analogy, I really do. But I just don't buy that the advisor operates in a vacuum.
You don't?
No. Even monopolies exist within a broader cultural and economic ecosystem. You're pointing to the advisor, but I think we need to zoom out and look at the department.
Okay, zoom out.
Why does an entire department of highly educated, supposedly ethical scholars look the other way when a tenured professor is, openly screaming at that 26-year-old international student in the hallway? Well, because the department chair is probably the abuser's golf buddy or their co-author. It's a structural conflict of interest.
Sometimes, yes. But more often it's driven by what we call the prestige economy and a profound scarcity mindset.
Scarcity of what?
Funding.
Exactly.
Imagine a department with a shrinking budget, which, let's be honest, is most of them right now.
If that abusive professor is a star researcher, bringing in $5 million in federal grants,
They're basically untouchable.
exactly. Those grants generate overhead that literally keeps the lights on in the building. It funds the department. The culture actively and consciously decides to tolerate the abuser because the prestige and the money are deemed more valuable than the graduate student's well-being.
Yeah, it's a terrible calculus.
It is. The culture has this narrative that says, yes, Professor X is a monster, but he's our monster, and we need his funding. If that scarcity mindset is the water everyone is swimming in, how does simply changing an org chart stop the bullying?
Well, it stops it by severing the direct line of dependency between the target and the abuser, regardless of what the department culture thinks.
How? How do you actually sever that?
Let's look at the mechanics of how this is actually being done. If we want a gold standard for breaking this monopoly structurally, we can look to the University of Michigan's Rackham Graduate School.
Right, the Michigan model.
Yeah. They looked at their internal climate data and realized that waiting for the culture to magically improve was just getting people hurt, so they structurally dismantled the one-on-one model.
By moving to a committee model. Right.
Exactly. But the mechanism is what matters here. They instituted mandatory committee formation within the very first year of a doctoral program.
Wait, year 1? Not year 3 or 4 when they write the dissertation?
No, day one. Suddenly, there are 3 or 4 sets of eyes on that student's progress, not just one. Furthermore, they established streamlined advisor change procedures with a structurally guaranteed funding bridge.
See, the funding bridge is interesting, but I think it misses the underlying dynamic.
I don't think it does, because it solves the exact scenario I laid out. If an advisor turns abusive, the student can just walk away and the institution guarantees their stipend and their lab access for a transition period.
But does it?
The student has a structural exit door. You don't need to wait for the department's culture to heal if the student can simply walk out without losing their livelihood or, being deported.
It is a compelling mechanism, but have you considered why the Michigan model actually gained traction?
Because it works?
Well, yes, but the structural change at Rackham only worked because it was paired with formal, rigorous training for faculty on power dynamics and mentorship best practices.
Okay, so they did both.
Right, but I'd call it a cultural intervention wearing a structural trench coat. And we must be incredibly careful here with how far we take this.
Careful how?
By over-structuring advisement. Like some institutions are even floating the idea of rotating advisors, where students bounce around every semester.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, and we risk severely diluting the deep vocational calling and scholarly mentorship that actually requires to function.
Wait, are you saying that intense mentorship requires the risk of abuse?
No, not at all. I'm saying the production of novel, paradigm-shifting research requires intense, prolonged intellectual friction. It's an apprenticeship.
Sure, but
It requires a mentor who deeply, intimately understands a student's highly specific academic niche over a span of like half a decade. If we dilute that mentor relationship to a mere committee vote or constantly rotate them like shift workers, don't we risk treating graduate students like corporate cogs on an assembly line? We lose the cultivation of independent scholars.
okay, I have to push back on that. Because that vocational calling narrative, that is exactly the cultural myth that institutions use to justify exploitation.
You think it's just a myth?
Yes, when we call it a calling rather than a job, we normalize the chronic stress, the 80-hour work weeks, and the severe health consequences we see in the data. The autoimmune flare-ups, the clinical depression, the cardiovascular issues.
Well, the stress is real, obviously.
Right, and when a student's entire vocational identity is wrapped up in pleasing one brilliant master, the psychological devastation of bullying is absolute. Michigan's structure doesn't treat them like corporate cogs, it treats them like professionals who deserve standard labor protections.
But labor protections and exit doors don't stop the microaggressions in the seminar room.
They don't, but
A funding bridge helps a student flee, sure, but it doesn't stop the behavior from happening in the first place, and it certainly doesn't hold the abuser accountable in real time.
okay, which brings us to how we actually enforce accountability. I think we both agree that traditional HR and complaint processes in universities are just disastrous.
Oh, completely broken.
They route through the very power structures implicated in the abuse. Like we established, if a grad student reports their advisor to the department chair, that is a structural dead end.
Usually, yes.
So the structural solution is to build an entirely independent mechanism The University of British Columbia provides the blueprint here, actually.
The ombudsperson office?
Right, an ombudsperson with guaranteed structural independence from the academic administration. They have direct oversight by the Board of Trustees, not the deans.
That makes a huge difference.
It does. This means they have the authority to investigate without ever needing departmental approval. The department's scarcity mindset doesn't even matter because the ombudsperson operates completely outside of it.
An independent ombudsperson is certainly better than a conflicted department chair. But think about the timeline of that mechanism.
What do you mean, the timeline?
Formal reporting is, by its very nature, entirely reactive.
Well, yes, you have to report it after it happens.
Right. By the time someone gathers the courage to file a formal complaint to a board-level ombudsperson, the trauma has already occurred. The career trajectory has already been derailed.
That's true of any justice system, though.
But the physiological stress response has already done its damage. To truly protect targets, institutions need proactive accountability. And that means bystander intervention.
Bystander intervention? I mean, in a strict academic hierarchy, we literally just established how concentrated the power is.
Yes, precisely because of that hierarchy. Look at what the Massachusetts Institute of Technology did. They didn't just hand out a pamphlet that says, if you see something, say something.
Right. What did they actually do?
They adapted sexual assault prevention models specifically for the complex power dynamics of academia. The mechanism here is vital. They train faculty in situational awareness using intensive scenario practice and role play.
Okay, but how does role-playing change the reality of the power imbalance?
Because it rewires the physiological response.
Rewires it?
Yes. When you see a colleague publicly humiliating a student during a colloquium, your body goes into fight or flight. Your amygdala hijacks your brain and you freeze.
Sure, nobody wants to step into the line of fire.
Exactly. The MIT training gives people preloaded scripts and actual practice so they can bypass that freeze response. They learn how to interrupt, maybe by casually redirecting the conversation or asking a clarifying question that breaks the tension.
Without just yelling at the abuser.
Right. Without directly attacking the abuser's ego and escalating the situation. Through this training, passive witnesses become active allies in the room. An ombudsperson in a remote office cannot offer that immediate peer-to-peer real-time protection. Only a cultural shift in how bystanders behave can do that.
The psychology behind rewiring the freeze response is fascinating, and I respect the intent of the MIT program. I really do.
But you have a but coming.
I do. I have to challenge the practical application here. Academia is defined by extreme power asymmetries. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of an untenured junior faculty member.
Okay.
They are maybe 7 years away from a tenure review. The person berating the student in that colloquium is the tenured, highly cited department chair, who literally controls whether that junior faculty member gets tenure.
Which means whether they keep their job.
Exactly. It is structurally irrational to expect the vulnerable to police the powerful simply because we gave them a situational awareness workshop and a preloaded script.
But it's not about asking the vulnerable junior faculty member to martyr themselves. You are absolutely right that it would be unfair to put the burden entirely on them.
So who does the intervening?
It is about holding the powerful accountable to a completely new set of cultural metrics. So the junior faculty member doesn't have to be a martyr, and this answers your question directly. We change how leadership is evaluated at the cultural level.
Okay. How so?
Look at Stanford University's revised department chair evaluation criteria. For decades, academic chairs were evaluated on two things, right?
Research and grants.
Research productivity and grant revenue. The culture completely ignored interpersonal dynamics. Stanford changed the cultural metric by instituting mandatory 360-degree feedback. They now systematically capture perspectives from subordinates, administrative staff, peers, and graduate students.
Okay, but how is that different from like a standard corporate review?
Because it specifically measures climate stewardship. This aligns perfectly with Harvard professor Amy Edmondson's research on psychological safety.
Oh, the psychological safety concept.
Yes. For those unfamiliar, psychological safety isn't some soft HR buzzword about being nice. It is a hard, measurable metric. It is the shared belief within a team that you can speak up, point out a mistake, or challenge a superior without fear of punishment or humiliation.
Right.
Stanford made establishing that safety a core institutional competency. If a department chair tolerates a toxic climate, if they allow that public humiliation in the seminar room to continue, they face real consequences, up to losing their administrative appointments. We are changing what it means to be a successful leader.
Well, I can see that Stanford's model sounds highly effective. But wait, listen closely to the mechanism you just described.
What about it?
Revised evaluation criteria, mandatory 360-degree feedback loops, and the concrete removal of administrative appointments.
Right.
Those are structural changes to the evaluation mechanism itself. You are actually proving my point.
I don't know if I'd say that you are.
Relying on leadership communication or culturally reframing academic rigor is entirely too soft. It only works when it is backed by concrete, distributed authority structures.
Look, I wouldn't say I'm proving your point. I'd say I'm showing how structure relies on culture to function.
But if we want psychological safety, we can't just mandate it culturally. We have to enforce it structurally.
But
We need things like strict term limits for department chairs to prevent them from building untouchable fiefdoms over 20 years. We need authentic shared governance, where graduate student reps aren't just invited to a town hall event, but have actual structural voting power on curriculum and climate committees.
okay, but the structure is just the vessel.
It's the foundation.
You can have a perfectly designed 360-degree review process structurally implemented, but if the underlying culture still firmly believes the narrative that suffering produces better scholars, the peers will simply use that 360 review to validate the abuser.
Wait, how would they validate them in a review explicitly designed to catch abuse?
By reframing the abuse as excellence. They will fill out the 360 form and write, yes, Professor X is demanding. He yells sometimes, but it produces excellence. It toughens the students up for the real world.
Yeah, I've heard that exact excuse.
Right. The structure fails if the cultural lens looking through it is distorted. That is why culture change initiatives have to deeply reframe the narrative. We have to actively celebrate positive cultural exemplars.
Sure, I agree with that.
We have to explicitly value collegial conduct in promotion narratives, meaning you don't get tenure just for your publications, you get it for how you treat your lab.
Which is a huge shift.
Massive. The University of Toronto undertook comprehensive culture change precisely by facilitating department-level dialogues. It forced faculty to explicitly reckon with their informal norms and their implicit biases, which, so often make marginalized scholars disproportionately vulnerable.
Yeah. This is a really fascinating convergence of Westover's analysis. Let me just summarize my position in light of how deep we've gone into these mechanics.
Go ahead.
Academic bullying thrives in the dark corners of concentrated power. The isolation of the lab, the strict privacy norms of advisement, the unilateral control a single PI has over a student's funding and visa. These are architectural flaws in the academy.
I hear that.
We cannot rely on the goodwill, the situational awareness, or the cultural enlightenment of individuals who hold absolute power over others. Only by structurally distributing authority through independent reporting lines like UBC's ombudsperson, guaranteed funding bridges like Michigan, and mandatory committee oversight from day one, can institutions meaningfully protect their most vulnerable scholars from the monopoly of the advisor.
And just to summarize my perspective, those structural frameworks are hollow without the cultural will to enforce them.
You really think they're hollow?
I do. You can build the most robust, independent reporting mechanisms in the world, you can add committees and funding bridges, but if the scarcity mindset and the prestige economy remain untouched, the institution will always inevitably find a workaround to protect its star grant winners.
That is a depressing thought.
It is, but it's true. Transforming the narrative that normalizes hazing as rigor, rewiring our responses to incentivize real-time bystander intervention like MIT, and making psychological safety a rigorously measured leadership metric like Stanford, these are the true engines of change. We have to heal the toxic soil before any new architecture can stand.
Well, despite our different approaches to the solution, I think we do find absolute agreement on the catastrophic failure of the current system.
Completely.
The status quo is disastrously costly. When institutions turn a blind eye to bullying because of a prestige economy, They are just hemorrhaging their top talent.
They really are. Brilliant graduate students are abandoning their degrees after years of intense investment, leaving with massive debt and deep trauma.
Exactly. And early career faculty are fleeing to industry rather than run the tenure gauntlet.
Right.
And honestly, from a purely institutional financial perspective, the legal liabilities are staggering. We've seen university systems face multi-million-dollar settlements over hostile environment claims that could have been entirely prevented.
Not to mention the profound physical and psychological toll inflicted on the actual human beings at the center of this.
The human toll is it's devastating.
It is. We are talking about chronic autoimmune conditions, severe anxiety, clinical depression, and the complete, devastating erosion of a person's vocational identity. We completely agree that academic institutions must begin treating departmental climate and psychological safety with the exact same systematic, rigorous, heavily funded attention that they currently apply to research productivity and grant acquisition.
Yes, they aren't separate issues. Maintaining rigorous intellectual standards, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge, while vigorously protecting human dignity.
Perfectly said.
And the empirical research on exactly how to fix this crisis, from independent ombudspersons to bystander intervention role play, from early committee oversight to 360-degree climate evaluations, all of that already exists.
The roadmap has been peer-reviewed and is sitting right there on the table.
Exactly. But it brings us back to the core tension. You can have the perfect architectural blueprint for a new, safer building. You can even identify the toxic soil and have the exact chemical formula to remediate it.
But will they do it?
Right. The question we leave our listeners with today is not whether academia knows how to stop this crisis of bullying, but whether these historic, deeply entrenched institutions possess the collective will to actually rebuild, or if they are content to let the collapse continue.